having what I proposed with the freezing of the police budget and the increase in the creation of the Community Safety Innovation Fund.
Okay. As the new mayor, will you have time to intervene in the current negotiations with the Winnipeg Police Service?
I hope so.
With the union. Okay. Okay.
I don't think I've actually said that any decision that is made right now should not be made. It should be left to the future city council and mayor's office.
I said the other day, because it's 7% or 11.5% or 12%, or should it be 40%? You know, I'm a little hesitant to say that it should be a particular percentage. I think the challenge is, you know, that people are. I mean, the defund the police discussion gets quite, can trigger some real culture wars and end up with something that is not entirely helpful. The refund all of these services is really important. And when I walk around, I've been meeting with the community health executive directors. We had 3 rounds of calls, I think, in writing this mental health and addictions piece, where I suggested that we co-locate paramedics near community health centers. It's just the scale of what's required there is so far beyond it. And, you know, I tried to be very concrete. So I've said no helicopter. Well, you know, I'm going to be very specific about the things that I think should be not in the police budget. Because right now, if you say 10% under the current system, they get to decide what the 10% is. So I'm nervous about that narrative in the context of the city. Not that I don't agree with the spirit of shifting, but I think you should be specific. So I've said drones, not helicopters. That will save several $1 million. I've said a number of other things that I think in the model of policing cities should set that guy. So if we went to a community policing model, we would probably save about that. You know, a lot of this police spillover has now gone to firefighters and to paramedics. So you have to look at the larger pool of where that money's going if you're really trying, if the intent, which is what, as I understand it, is that you're trying to move money from the back end loaded to the front end loaded things. So the spirit of it I agree with. The mechanism I'm not entirely sure of. I would want it more elaborated because I think we're picking a bit of a number, but I think the spirit of it. But I think when I talked about this governance review I did, and when I'm talking about rethinking the mandate and charter of the city, getting rid of the police board, that is all about to liberate money from these sort of pockets that they're locked into where the city council can't move money around from police to police anywhere, to unlock all of that so that we're actually doing a community-based comprehensive strategy on racism, on safety, on violence, on poverty that is all interlinked. And then we build a new budget from the bottom up rather than having any kind of assumption about what money is entitled to what groups. But certainly, I believe something probably more substantial.
Yeah. This is another quick kind of yes or no because it's
Sure.
a hard line for a lot of people. So
Yeah.
PAC calls for a 10% reduction in the
No.
police budget.
No.
Thank you.
I support the initiative, but once again, you have to elect a mayor in the office that supports that initiative. If you do not elect individuals in the first place, the 10% will never happen. I am willing to talk with all city councilors to make sure that we are on the same page in allocating those resources that are necessary to address systematic racism.
Kate, in a committee once used a term that I completely agree with, and that's the detasking of police. Right now, you know, we've done, at City Hall, we've done the analysis on the 911 calls. What are the 911 calls? What do people need when they're calling 911? Over 50% of the calls that police receive at their core are not crime calls, they're not policing calls. So if we could detask the police and separate social services calls from police calls, then we don't, you know, there'll be fewer and fewer times we have to send 2 officers with badges and guns to the calls that really are not crime calls. There's real crime calls, and we need to make sure police are available to do that. I have said I am not in favor of defunding the police, but I'm certainly in favor of and committed to detasking or retasking the police. Our city is a growing city, and so we need to make sure that, you know, the men and women of the Winnipeg Police Service are there and available to do the work that they need to do. But we also have to free them up and make sure that when someone, and make sure that, more importantly, the right agency is responding to a call for service. right now we have, anyways, we have an initiative where we're pairing up a plainclothes police officer with a mental health worker. That's an initiative, our alternate response to a citizen in crisis. To me, that initiative and initiatives like that are more important. The plainclothes police officer is there just in case someone is, they're high and in that state, are dangerous to themselves or others. That individual is there to help. But they're with a mental health worker, because what that individual needs is really mental health and addiction services, right? And so I think those approaches are take us along the way of where we need to get to make sure that we are offering the right response to the call for service.
So last follow-up, sorry guys,
Yeah.
I don't want to take all this time, but it is a clarifying question, because our call is for a civilian-led response. PAC and Make Poverty History is a civilian-led crisis response unit, as opposed to police, because of course with ARC, it still goes to 911. 911 still sends police officers, and those police officers then call ARC.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what do you think
Well,
about a completely different system for those calls?
I'm open to the discussion. At the end of the day, what we need is this. When someone calls 911 and they're in crisis, or they're calling because someone else is in crisis, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that that individual in crisis is getting the right response, the right agency to respond to them. And so I think if we start from who's at the end of the call, making the call, and what do they need, and work backwards from there, I think we can continue to modify and change our systems for the sake of the people in need.
We have one more follow-up, if that's okay.
Okay.
I responded to a person in crisis a few months ago, was ready to die by suicide. They did not want me to call the police because they were a trans person who had already had really awful experiences with the police. And I had the best experience in terms of a crisis call, and called the 24-hour safe space from Spence Neighborhood Association, who came down. My reflection after that, and a lot of people I talked to, is that because of the work I do, I know about that safe space, but few people might have done that. So a lot of people might have listened to this person's needs, but saw that they were in immediate danger and thought the police was the only response. So one of the things might be there, especially if we're advocating for this civilian-led response, would be letting citizens know how might we respond to things in a way that's talking about the services available, and one that also is a person-centered approach. So would that be something also in terms of the communications, or how we get citizens to think a bit more about how to respond?
In an answer, yes. Right. We need to always be improving and making sure, again, that individuals are getting the right response and the help. I've been working through my campaign with and speaking to two mothers who tragically, their children, adult children, took their own lives. We're talking about the need and more for peer support training, that when someone is in has suicidal thoughts, perhaps the best response to them is someone who understands them, who's been down that journey, right? And for police officers and others who are well-meaning and doing their job, they're trying to do the job to their best ability. If someone who's almost like a peer support can respond, who understands and can work with that individual, that may be the better response. So we can continue to modify, change, and look at our systems so that we're making sure that the right agency is responding to that call for service.
Well, first and foremost, I'm not trying to be a politician here, so I will tell you my view. The first thing I would like to do is to review the impact of reallocation of budget before implementation, right? And I will tell you why I'm saying that. My plan is to start addressing underlying issues such as crime prevention, right? Homelessness, addictions, and mental health before I commit to, reallocation of police budget. The reason I'm saying this is the first thing for me is to review. If we reduce it, is it going to have more impact on our people? If yes, no. So that's the point I'm trying to say, right? Because you have to look at it right now. What is the current state? Before you change something, maybe as a professional engineer, we don't just do things, and you need to get some facts. I can tell you, okay, I will cut by 20%. But I've heard a lot of stuff, maybe, all this money, police, they don't get it. This one, they pay for this housing, they pay for this. I've heard a lot of stuff. But when you don't have all those kind of a fact, it will be hard for you to make an informed decision. So my plan is to reassess and look at it. Is it going to have an impact on the public? If yes, not yet. But I will be honest with you, at some point, the police will tell me, hey, Idris, we need to reduce this budget because by the time we start addressing all those issues, oh, we don't have to spend money on this. We don't have to spend money on this. Everyone will come together. I believe we have to work together as a team, and say, you know what? Let's move this city to an enviable height.
Nope, we're not doing that job for them. That they can figure that out. That is up to them to figure out what they need and just like I wouldn't dictate to any other department what we do with funding, the police need to figure it out themselves. But my commitment is they have to figure it out with 10% less funding. Institutions aren't always the people, right? So I also believe that this not only benefits community, but this is also an opportunity for the current Winnipeg Police Service to lift themselves up, understand what the community needs are, understand that people are watching, that they need to start to do their part, and whatever that takes. And I think that this reallocation is a very important step for all of us, whether it's police or whether it's community, because we all need to understand that this is, because it's not like you don't have young members of the Winnipeg Police who are PTSD, burning out themselves, completely unable to do their job as well. Why? Because they're being told to do things they're completely unequipped to do, right? So I think that from a community perspective, as in we don't want division. We don't want this us and them mentality. That is what has happened for generations. That's not where we want to go. What we're trying to do is create scenarios that everyone can work together in a good way to meet the needs of the entire community.
I support what they're trying to achieve, but I think there's better ways of going about doing it. And one of the things that I am excited about is the work of the nonprofits don't just impact the police financially. It also impacts other systems where people are wildly overrepresented, hospital, healthcare, and justice. In the first scenario that you're talking about, we have money that is currently in the police budget paying for something that's not part of their mandate. So what the public sees is, the police are paying for supportive housing, say, for example. And what I want the police to do is to pay for the impact that supportive housing has on their system, because then they see that it's actually a public safety tool, and a public safety tool that has better public safety outcomes for less money. So they're not answerable because it's not the relationship is in a modern context. It's not in an old context. It's a relationship where there's an agreement, and we can easily track what the financial benefits are, and that the money is transferred. So the nonprofit goes about doing its work. It's not taking direction from police or anyone else. It's delivering the outcome and getting paid for that.
So community experience with partnering with the police is very much often the police, and I've said this to Chief Smythe, we're often treated as the junior partner.
Yeah.
So
but
that takes away from the community. And of course the model that I have in my mind when I hear you talk about that is the proceeds of crime fund. You almost cannot get access to that money unless you have the police approval for it.
Here's the key difference. Part of decolonizing these relationships is, we're talking about money, but there's a second critical feature, and that is that these agencies where the money is now, they have to let go, because colonization is also about control. And so what we're seeing, what I'm describing, is a nonprofit sector stepping into its power. And you can't step into its power if we're not upending the existing power structures.
So currently, I don't support it in actual text. So I, like anybody else, knows that there's a major imbalance when you look at the budget. And I would do this in business all the time. I would look at certain departments and say, like, is one department way, out of line with the other departments and how much money we're spending, on that department. And currently a large amount of the budget for the police service is wrapped up in wages and salaries and benefits, and that is tied into contract agreements and collective bargaining agreements as well. And so it would be a really difficult thing to change immediately. However, I think that going forward, we need to say as a city, like, what level of spending are we happy with? What level of spending can we afford? And and I look at this as an overall system here, because I will look at the system and say at some point we need to, like, balance out these departments so that we're not feeling like we're spending way too much money on police services and way too little money on recreational services, or some of the other things that are actually really good at keeping kids off the streets, people off the streets, and that kind of stuff. So at this moment, I've said I would freeze the police budget, because I need to look at the books and I need to get into a deeper dive on that. We think that the rest of the budget is hard to understand. The police budget is hard to understand too, because it's also working with a board. Council has the ability to adjust that budget. There is no question that we could do that, and I think I would have to start to take a little bit of a long-term strategy on this and look at the collective bargaining agreements as well, and make sure that we are spending an appropriate amount of money, going forward, and so that we're not lopsided. I want to just talk about the social services side of things, because this is something I brought up in my second policy statement when I was talking about police. I think it really is important that, in order to look at adjusting, the amount of money spent on actual policing, we do need to look at some of the things that police are currently doing right now, and seeing if we could get them to not do it, right? And that would allow us to look at saying, okay, how can we now sort of shift some of that money around? And there are a couple of things that they have been working on right now. They have I'm gonna.
ARC.
Yes, thank you. I know it was ARC, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get the actual words wrong at this moment, but the active alternative response to citizens in crisis. Thank you very much. And I like that idea, and I think the problem with the pilot program is, just like our strategies that we come up, we just haven't funded it enough to actually get a good idea. Is this actually going to work? So this is a plainclothes police officer partnered with, a social worker, and who meets people in a different way than if you're showing up in a uniform. Right, we have mobile crisis units. I think those can be expanded as well, so that maybe police aren't the first people who have to show up at a situation where somebody is experiencing mental health crisis or addictions. And that's where I think the downtown community safety patrol comes in really well too, because they've started to take on that role, and they've also changed their uniforms so that they're not uniformed. We for sure need to look at all the community organizations and that are working together to put eyes on the street, to help people on the street, Bear Clan, and all of the other groups that are. When I was working with Central Neighborhoods, we funded a couple of different community patrols, and they're doing great work. And that's the type of stuff that police don't need to do necessarily first. We look at wellness checks. So those kinds of things can be done possibly by ARC, or possibly even cadets too, to reduce the workload. One of the other things that I looked at, because it does take a lot of resources, is when the police are in hospitals. So hospital time could be an entire shift for 2 police officers, right? And so what that does is that it means that we have lower response time for other things because the police are in the hospitals. So I would like to look at different ways of solving that with, potentially even cadets who can take on those roles, and that would have to be expanding their role would have to be worked out in the agreements. But I think that there is more that we can do with cadets to to allow police to just focus more on policing and not the social services side of that. Yeah.
So the ARC program is something that we actually so we're part of the Police Accountability Coalition. We have issues with it because it is still a police first response.
Right. Okay.
Would you be in, like, there are alternatives where it's actually a community first response?
Yeah.
Would you be open to looking at that as opposed to because you said we have to get the police to do less, but
Yeah.
when they're given the opportunity, they still kind of hang on.
I know. Yeah, it's funny actually because I used to work, like when I was a kid, I used to do a drop-in center. I worked for the city actually when I was a kid, and the police service actually came in and took that drop-in center over too. And I wasn't super happy with the way that was laid out back then because I thought we had a good situation. But yes, I would definitely be open to that. And I think that I think the police service would be too. Right, so it's the reason why I think it's important to have in this situation to have a police officer paired with a social worker is because there are at least 50% of the calls that they can escalate into some form of violence, and so it's not necessary. I don't think it's a safe situation to be sending people who are in the social work field to some calls when it may escalate into something that could be harmful for them. So I would be definitely open to that and would love to have a future conversation on that. Yeah, definitely.